I have a PhD in human sexuality, but my first degree was in psychology, so I'm dusting that off to talk to you about the psychological principles behind why people get so mad at cyclists, specifically drivers. So some of you will be like, yes, and some of you will be like, I hate this woman. So that's why. So we're going to start with the upsides of bikes. They are incredibly low cost to buy and maintain. They're good for the environment. It's literally a form of exercise to use it. They take up very little space on the road, both using them and putting them away. But there are a lot of expectations around them based on who we think ride them. There's a perception of cyclists specifically being young, white, yuppie men and hipsters and stuff like that. But they're used by a very heterogeneous group. Because they're so low cost, they're very commonly used by low-income populations, by immigrants, etc. And we need to consider that it's incredibly accessible to all varieties of ages. Most of us are pedestrians at some point, and most cyclists also drive, but not all drivers have experience riding a bike. And because they don't have that experience, they don't necessarily understand the motivation of cyclists. And that is going to factor into some of the things that they think. So the first thing that people complain about is that cyclists break laws. The implication being that other people don't. But the actual data does not confirm that. So the vast majority of people in Philadelphia cross against the light when they're walking, but they don't think of that as criminal. And drivers break laws at the same rate as cyclists, but they usually do so for different reasons. They tend to do so to save time. They tend to do so for reasons of convenience. Well, cyclists will also do it because they're trying to get away from traffic. They don't want to be pinned between moving and parked cars. So it's also a consideration of safety. And so this is part of our limitation, because if we don't understand that, it just seems like they're being jerks, but we don't necessarily empathize with them because we don't have that same experience. But again, why are we like taking it so personally? Why are we mad at them? Because if I consider, yeah, there's some jerk people who walk around. Yeah, they're jerk drivers. I just yelled at one of them. But cyclists are an entirely different group. I don't belong to that group, and therefore, if some of them are jerks, I can ascribe like characteristics to the entire group, and that's social identity theory. The next reason people complain about cyclists is that they're dangerous, they're reckless, they come out of nowhere. Cycling is very efficient, but it is not yet teleportation, so that's actually not true. But it has more to do with the fact that cyclists are usually paying attention and people walking and driving actually aren't. They're more likely to be using they're more likely to be doing some other activity, listening to music, having a conversation, using an electronic device. Also, there's the fact that we don't take in most of the data that's happening around us. The only things that integrate into long-term memory are the things that are shocking or upsetting, something we have an emotional impact about, and that's the principle of memorable effects. So drivers are especially bad at estimating how distracted they are and how good they are at driving. 90% of drivers think they are above average. So because they don't realize that they're bad at driving, they ascribe all of the things that happen to others. We project onto others our own bad behaviors. So it's not that I'm distracted, I'm totally fine at this, you're coming out of nowhere. So that's the theory of projection. There are straight up people who think that roads aren't made for bicycles. Well, that's true, because they were made for horses. Philadelphia's roads are made for carriages, and what happened is that cars were invented and time passed on, and originally people thought that roads were far too dangerous for cars. It would kill a bunch of people, because it did. So the AAA and car manufacturers had a concerted effort to combat that idea. So they planted stories in newspapers about how pedestrians were responsible for their own deaths and invented the concept of jaywalking, which had not been illegal before, but it was invented and now is legal in like 50 states. So we have this perception in our own lifetimes, because car-centric model is what we've grown up with, that's how it's always been and that's how it has to be, but then what happens is we can't go forward. The world can't continue to be that way. And then we just think that assholes, you know, on cycles, like, just fuck them, they're entitled. It's the same reason people hate vegans. Quite frankly. But if you come from this car-centric model and you think that roads are meant for cars, anything that allows other folks access to what you think is rightfully yours feels like relative deprivation. It's the same reason that white people have a problem with anything that helps anyone else. Then there's traffic psychology, which tells us the act of driving a car actually makes you go into de-individuation. We're surrounded by people, but we're separated from them, and so we become more aggressive, and it lowers our personal accountability and empathy. And then we're having all of this stuff happen, and rather than owning the fact that, yeah, maybe I probably should ride a bike, I'm gonna create a reaction formation where I'm like, you're probably judging me, so I'm gonna judge you first. And that's how a reaction formation works, and it's a defense mechanism. It's one of the few things Freud got right. So what are our solutions? All of us should behave better. We should treat the other people around us as human beings and not just obstacles on our way to getting to where we're going. Acknowledge that we have these biases, all the stuff I just talked about, so that you can make any sort of counter against them. Create systems that allow all modes of transportation to move around efficiently, and then, of course, maybe not treat bicycles like tiny cars and come up with laws that are specifically for them. So, thank you very much for your time.